Are we okay to start, Kayla? You want to wait a few more minutes?
I think we're good to go.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our ongoing series on the peaceful unification of the Korean Peninsula. Our hosting organization, the International Media Association for Peace, recognizes the vital role that journalists play in guarding against totalitarianism and supporting the expansion of freedom. IMAP represents a worldwide professional network of journalists whose support is socially responsible in moral media to convey accurate content, address the challenges of our times based on the highest principles of ethical journalism, and understanding that universal values are key elements of a world of peace. We have some wonderful journalists and scholars with us today, and I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Michael Jenkins. He is currently serving as the president of the Washington Times Foundation and the president of UPF International. Dr. Jenkins, you have the floor.
I think Dr. Jenkins might have dropped out there.
Okay.
We've had some internet difficulty.
Okay, perhaps I can go and introduce our first panelist.
Yeah, and I'll let you know when he comes back.
Okay, very good. Okay, give me a second here. Okay, just a second, please.
Hans, I wonder if I can ask a quick question. When I hear the bell sound, what does that mean?
That's just people joining our webinar.
Ah.
It's not angels getting their wings, so it's a little different.
A different sound for that. Okay.
A different sound for that. Yes, it's close though. Let me just pull up the script here. Okay.
I think Dr. Jenkins is just joining us now.
Is he back? Dr. Jenkins, are you there?
You just have to unmute Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you.
Okay, well, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all of our viewing audience throughout the world and especially in the United States. We're honored to present to you this wonderful webinar that Hans has just introduced. I'm the president of UPF International. I'd like to introduce our first presenter today, Professor Joseph H. Chung, PhD. After having studied history at the Seoul National University in Korea, Professor Chung received a Bachelor's of Arts in Social Science and in Economics at Laval University and obtained a PhD at the University of Toronto. He has taught economics at universities in Canada and Korea, including KDI School of Public Policy and Management in Seoul. He has been advisor to various governments and research centers in Canada and Korea. He also has taught at the Montreal University, Quebec University, and Sherbrooke University. He's president of the Montreal Korean Association. He was a member of the National Unification Advisory Council of Korea. Lately, he is studying the issues of globalization of East Asia, including Sino-US relations, Washington-Pyongyang relations. Welcome, Dr. Chung.
Thank you very much. Dr. Jenkins, thank you for your introduction. Do you hear me very well? It's okay?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
fine.
Very good.
I'm really honored to be a part of this panel. And I thank also Mr. Pierre Beaugrand for giving me the pleasure of knowing UPF and invite me to this event. Excuse me. There's an old saying in Korea that Korea is shrimp crushed by fighting whales. Let's go back to the end of the 19th century. That time Korea had three big fat whales, China, Japan, and Russia. For Japan, Korea was a royal highway needed for its China conquest. For China, Korea was a buffer zone between Japan and China. For Russia, Korea offered the ice-free ports. Well, they all came to Korea and they produced two major wars, the Sino-Japan War and the Russo-Japan War. Well, Japan won both. Korea had to live on the 35 years of Japanese colonial oppression. Here we are, 2021, and we are discussing the issues of unification of Korea. But unification in Korea requires the end of the war. Since Armistice 1953, the state of war has existed for 68 years. Why? What are the reasons? There must be somebody, some country, which benefits from the state of war. The countries involved are the United States, China, Japan, or South Korea. Since the Korean War, U.S. knew that China would be a threat to U.S. sooner or later. So U.S. needs strong presence of armed forces in Korea to watch and contain China. For this, U.S. needs a state of war in Korea. Japan being the ally, it supports Washington. South Korea being the forefront American military base, it goes along. Moreover, China and conservative South Korea, a state of war in Korea is a useful tool for winning major elections. It is possible that China gets some benefit from the state of war as well. China may join the pro-war wagon because peaceful North Korea may become the pro-West. That's something that China may be afraid of. Then all powers have one in common. That is, they are all hesitant to end the Korean War. In short, as long as U.S. considers China as a threat to the global hegemony, the state of war is likely to stay. So the relevant question is this: whether China is a threat to the U.S. My view is China does not want to be a threat to U.S. If I'm right, then state of war is no longer needed. Now, coming back to the question of China being a threat to China, we should examine the nature of Sino-American rivalry. The rivalry is in the following relations: military relations, economic relations, and ideological relations. As far as the military rivalry is concerned, China is no match. National defense budget to China's $200 billion, that is 20% of American defense budget. The economic rivalry can cause some worries among American corporations, politicians. The China GDP will catch up with the US GDP by 2031. But the global Chinese economy is good for American economy and the global economy. Finally, there is an ideological conflict between liberal democracy of the US and Chinese Confucian socialism. China has no ambition of imposing its regime on other countries. Even if it wanted, it will not go far because it is too local, because it has no roots outside of China. Xi Jinping makes clear that China prefers peaceful and productive existence with the United States. He said in February 9, 2014, I quote, "The vast Pacific Ocean must have enough space to accommodate both China and United States," unquote. He believes strongly that the great power relation of no confrontation, mutual respect, and win-win relations. Graham Allison, in his famous book, suggests that it is unrealistic for the West to hope for one civilization acceptable by all, by the West in particular. I quote, "The notion that there could be universal civilization is a Western idea at odds with the particularism of most Asian societies and their emphasis on what distinguishes one people from another," unquote. Chinese ideological remains cannot be a threat to U.S. Besides, we remember Washington kept the friendly relations with China despite human rights problems throughout the period from 1970 to 2012. To sum up then, China is not a military threat to US. China is not economic threat to the United States. China's ideological regime cannot threat to the US. In short, China is not a threat. If so, why not end this war? Scholars in China envisage a world in which US remains sole global hegemon, while China remains economic power. To sum up, I wished personally to see a world in which two superpowers and two civilizations cooperate for the creation of a new world in which the love of neighbors prevails. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chung. Excellent, excellent remarks and presentation. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Michael Breen. Michael's a consultant and author and a columnist. He is the founding chairman of the CEO of Insight Communications Consultants, a public relations consultancy in Seoul, Korea. He was a Seoul correspondent for the Washington Times and The Guardian. He writes columns for Chosun Ilbo and the Korea Times. He's an author of Kim Jong-il, North Korea's Dear Leader, and The New Koreans, A Story of a Nation. He's an honorary citizen of Seoul. Let's welcome at this time Mr. Michael Breen. Welcome, Michael.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael, for that introduction, and hello, everybody. Just bear with me. Apart from having the pleasure of looking at my face, I'm also going to show you a few photographs in a presentation. 1 second. Now, can somebody advise me, how do I get rid of this?
F5.
F5, thanks very much. Okay.
괜찮았어?
No, I'm trying to get rid of this. Can you see this bar at the top?
Is it the green bar or the PowerPoint?
No, it's the Zoom.
Yeah, you can click it and hold and drag it to another part of your screen. You can't get rid of it entirely, but you can.
Oh, there you go.
Mike, if you, there you go.
All right. And then I'll chuck this away somewhere. Okay. How's that? Is that okay?
Great.
Very good.
Okay. So
can you enlarge it?
That's good enough.
Okay.
yeah, okay. So I'd like to, just a second here. Okay. From what you can see, is this black screen blocking?
No,
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 it's not. It's
everything.
just for me. Okay. Okay. I'd like to, we don't have a lot of time here, and I've just wasted about a minute. So I like to
don't worry,
make,
you have time, Michael.
oh, all right. Okay. All right. From the moment of their split in 1948, the two halves of Korea declared themselves to be both in favor of unification. And 70 odd or 73 years later, both still do. For these two rival countries, this unification that they adhere to is not just foreign policy, it's the strategic priority that drives all of their policy making. I must say, I suspect that Kim Jong-un in North Korea would give up unification if he could, but in a way he's trapped by the system that his grandfather created, and he is bound to remain committed to unification. On the South Korean side, the South Koreans for 3 decades now have sought to avoid sudden unification. And there's a consensus on this. This is ever since the German unification, which they studied very deeply. And then they realized that a sudden unification would be difficult for them. So now in South Korea, government, the political parties, whoever's in power, and the majority of the people, they still want unification, but they want it sometime in the future. Now, you could argue if there was a, say, a Unification Now political party in South Korea, they could stand up and call this position anti-unification. But there's no such party and there's no such claim, no such accusation made. Everybody pretty much accepts this. So both sides then are in favor of unification. And I should add that both sides are in favor of peaceful unification. North Korea changed its constitution to this effect in 1992. And this year, earlier this year, according to news reports, the ruling Workers' Party of North Korea finally ruled out revolution in South Korea as its strategy. So we may choose not to trust them on this, but that's formally the position that they're at now. So what do we, hold on one second, I've now got to, there we are. What we need to ask now is if both sides prioritize a unity that they have failed to achieve over a long period of time, we need to ask a few questions, like, is perhaps one side really against unification, or is it that they can't agree how to do it? Or as Professor Chung was just talking about, does the problem lie with their respective allies, China and America? Are they one way or another preventing unification? To answer this, we need to understand what the two Koreas mean by the word unification. What does this word actually mean? And perhaps the best way to do this is to use a football analogy. And by football, I mean, I know I'm talking to an American audience, but by football, I mean proper football, you know, soccer. So when two, let's take an example, when two strong teams like Germany and Brazil, for example, commit to the World Cup, what is it they actually want? Do they want fair play? No. If they could win by unfair play, they would do it. Do they want an exciting match? Not really. They don't care about that. Do they want a happy crowd? No, not interested. So what is it they want? They want the trophy. They want to win. And this success requires the defeat of the other team. And that's how it is with Korean unification. It's I win, you lose. And as you can see, this makes unification, despite the nice sound of the word, an inherently aggressive idea. So is there perhaps another way that's not aggressive? So our World Cup metaphor gives us two ways to unify. A unified Korea based on the North Korean system is one. That would be rather like North Vietnam's acquisition of South Vietnam in 1976. Or example, option number two, we could have a unified Korea based on South Korea's system. This would be like West Germany's merger with East Germany in 1990. Or perhaps there is a third way, a more equal kind of merger, a more negotiated merger of two equal sides. Perhaps, I don't know enough about this to argue it, but perhaps a bit like what Yemen achieved in 1990. So such a third option sounds reasonable in theory, but the trouble with it becomes apparent as soon as you ask the question, what can North Korea actually contribute to the external structure and to the internal character of such a unified state? I've pondered this for a long time. I've wondered, for example, could a unified Korea be a monarchy? Could there be some kind of way that Kim Jong-un becomes the king of a unified Korea, preferably with no powers? But no, that's just not going to happen. Could we have a one-party state? No. Could we have a unified Korea that's a democracy with the North Korean Workers' Party putting up candidates in a free and fair election? I can't see the current leadership of North Korea being fooled by a suggestion like that. So what about ideas? What part of this new united Korea could we say comes from North Korea? Is there something in their sense of Koreanness that the South Koreans can embrace as sort of integral to the new nation's unique selling point? I asked this question seriously, but honestly, for the life of me, I can't see what a country that has come into the 21st century praising Stalin has to offer. You have to ask, does a country which is in the middle of Northeast Asia that still experiences famine actually have anything to offer? I may be wrong, but all I can think of now is that the South Koreans might throw North Korea a bone by agreeing to let a new capital be there or something like that. What I'm getting at here is, and I know I'm sounding a bit unkind in a discussion about unification, I'm sounding a bit unkind to the other side, the North Korean side. But what I'm getting at is that when you drill down into this idea of a third way, it evaporates. That is because it is a suggestion that an advanced democracy join up as an equal partner with an impoverished Stalinist dictatorship. So this third way ends up really being like option number two, the German way. In other words, I think now things might be different a few decades in the future, but right now I think there is no third way. And this brings us back to our question of why, if both sides are in favor of unification, it hasn't happened yet. I think we need to accept that there is a precondition for unification. At least as a precondition for peaceful unification, which is what we advocate. And that precondition is shared values. And the reason that the two Koreas have failed to unify, in my opinion, the core reason is the absence of shared values. So here's what we're up against. North Korea. Let's look. I'm trying to look here at what the core ideas in these two countries. North Korea. North Korea is what you may describe as a nationalistic, socialist dictatorship. In contrast to other forms of communism, where the perceived enemy was the system identified with the capitalist, the clergy, the bourgeoisie, North Korean communism is rooted in an independence movement against a colonial oppressor. Even now in North Korea, citizens are classified according to what their grandparents were doing at the end of the 1945 Japanese colonial rule. So in this concept, in this picture of communism, the North Korean Revolution is not about overthrowing an oppressive past, sweeping away the past. It's actually about liberating the Korean past. It's liberating all things Korean. The people, meanwhile, in North Korea are seen as innocents who need a strong leader to lead the fight against internal and external enemies. The idea of democracy is that the people are represented by the ruling party, and they do what it says. What do they value most? What are their values? Worship of the leader, loyalty to the race, sacrifice for the collective, things like that. South Korea, on the other hand, is an OECD member state, an advanced democracy whose people value their freedom, their rights, and exercise their preference through periodic elections, which they expect to be free and fair. If you ask South Koreans what their national values are, they will probably tell you something they were taught at school about, filial piety or Confucian values or something. But actually, these are not their values anymore. Their values are the values of a modern democracy. Human rights and freedom and so on. They expect their authorities to act justly and fairly, and they consider their free press a watchdog to make sure that political power is restrained. Yes, they are nationalistic, but as a major trading nation, they are nationalistic in an international context. And as they become more and more exposed to other cultures, that nationalism sort of dilutes, it converts to a sort of patriotism. So complicating the South Korean values landscape is an internal split, which we are familiar with in democracies between left and right. This is, I wouldn't overstate this, because the South Koreans are South Korean. But it is relevant to us because unlike the split in America between conservative and liberal, the split in Korea between left and right is largely a difference between rival concepts of a future unified state and the process to get there. Neither side, neither the left or right in South Korea, prefers the North Korean system. Neither has any illusions anymore about how horrible the North is. Simply put, the political right, the conservatives, are loyal to the South Korean state, and they see unified Korea as an expansion of modern South Korea. The political left is loyal to an as yet unborn unified Korea that has its roots back in the early 20th century. They feel that South Korea is somehow illegitimate and in some way impure. Instead of seeing Japan as a fellow democrat in a region dominated by illiberal China, the South Korean left sees Japan as the cause of Korea's historical anguish and will probably not change its mind about that until unification. And as is the way with left and right in America, these two political tribes see shadows of evil in one another. So let me, I'm conscious of the time here. So this picture between the two Koreas can change if the values change, or perhaps I should say, for the picture to change, to be conducive to unification, values need to change. The merger of 25 million North Koreans with 50 million South Koreans will be complicated, but with shared values, it could work well if it's managed. So what are the desired values? I think the answer is quite obvious. It's a rules-based, a law-based democracy, free market capitalism, respect for rights, a fair system of justice, and so on. Fortunately, these are the values of the bigger, wealthier, and stronger of the two parties already, South Korea. So given what might happen in the future, a coup in the north, an appeal to China by North Korea, it's important to articulate these values and keep them uppermost so that we may make judgments, managing threats and taking advantage of opportunities without sacrificing those values. The reason I'm laboring this issue of values is that I think it must underscore UPF's approach to this issue. And while I don't want to sound too cynical about this, but while efforts at outreach,
Please mute your microphones, except for the speaker. Thank you.
While efforts at outreach, exchange, and dialogue have a role, I don't think they're going to change much. And they haven't, we've seen that. Seriously, I think a focus on projects alone, without taking into account these underlying values, is a path that has been a path to disappointment. To give an example, and I'm sure some people are in favor of this, so I don't want to upset anybody, but some people have been promoting the idea of the DMZ as an ecological peace zone, not just because this might be a nice idea before the construction companies move in, but because they actually think that talks about this could lead to peace. But to me, this is fantasy. The effort that will lead to unification is the effort towards changing values. We need to strategize to change values so that when the time comes, democracy is the natural choice for people of both sides. And there are two ways, just finally, two ways in which America and other democratic powers can contribute to this. One is to act as models for the North Koreans. This, in fact, they already do, but there's a theme which is gathering steam in the world, promoted by China and Russia, that American democracy is undesirable and even laughable, and we need to recover from this. Second, and this is my point I'd like to emphasize, I think American policymakers need to set a vision of a democratic Northeast Asia. It's obvious that America right now has no vision for this part of the world. I won't say it doesn't care, but it has no thought through vision upon which it bases its policymaking. It did for Europe during the Soviet era, and this led to the Helsinki Accords in 1975, whereby 35 nations, including the Soviet Union, agreed to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms and to cooperate on economic, scientific, humanitarian, and other areas. We need something similar for the greater China sphere. With such a vision, we will recognize opportunities and look for ways to nudge the region along in the right direction. But all we have when we look at Asia, East Asia, from Washington's point of view now, is China is bad, must be resisted. This is the recent change of the last 5 years. North Korea, nuclear weapons, bad, must keep saying that they shouldn't have them. And that's it. I find it historically myopic And given the inevitable rise of China and the inevitable eclipse of American hegemony by China, strategically disastrous. So I think that is our imperative, to set a vision of a democratic Northeast Asia and then set our policy according to that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Excellent presentation. Please unshare your screen. And our next presenter is podcaster Jocko Svetslut. Jocko runs a weekly podcast on North Korea related issues for NK News and writes a monthly column in Korean for the Donghae Ilbo, a major publication and daily newspaper. He previously was director of business innovation at HMP Law, and prior to that, he was a senior editor at the Korean Overseas Culture and Information Service. Jocko has a BA in Modern European Studies and German from the University of Melbourne, a BA in Asian Studies from Monash University, and MA from Leiden University. Jocko is fluent in English, Korean, German, and Dutch, and is quite influential throughout the Korean Peninsula. Let's welcome Mr. Jocko Svetslut.
Thank you much. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Jenkins. I don't want to play up my own influence too much. I think it's best to, to move straight into the presentation. So as Dr. Jenkins mentioned, I am the host of the NK News podcast, which is a weekly interview show all about North Korea. And for today's episode, the 61st anniversary of the Korean War Armistice, I interviewed Dick Underwood, who was one of the first interpreters on the United Nations side at the Kaesong peace talks all those years ago. Dick is almost 90 years old and he shared some amazing stories. So at the risk of self-promotion, I do encourage all of our audience members to go and check out the NK News podcast right after this webinar. A couple of weeks ago, I had Steve Began on for a 2.5-hour discussion about his experience with the talks between North Korea and the United States. That was an incredible experience talking to him. It was like an oral history. So you'll find that at nknews.org. So today, here's my basic thesis. South Korea is already a peaceful, stable, and safe place to live. It has a dynamic, growing economy and is performing well in cultural and sporting arenas as well. For most younger South Koreans, that's enough. They do not go to bed worried about war with the North or wondering what their age cohorts in the North are doing. They spend most of their days without giving a single thought to North Korea. When asked about unification, as Michael Breen said earlier, most South Koreans assent to it as a concept to aspire to someday, but they're not interested in seeing unification happen very soon or very quickly. As the last few years have shown, North Korea controls the speed and continuation of dialogue, either with South Korea or with the United States. When the leaders in Pyongyang want to speak, there is dialogue. When they do not, there is none. In fact, a lot of time talking with North Korea is actually talking about talking with North Korea. Governments in Seoul and governments in Seoul and Washington change every few years, and their policies and stances and approaches do too. On the other hand, North Korea has had the same family in charge since 1948, and it has learned to live with constant change in the world around it, while it remains more or less the same. It knows how to deal with democratic governments in a way that benefits its interests and doesn't threaten them. That said, in Korean, there is a saying, 10년이면 강산도 변한다, meaning in 10 years, even mountains and rivers will transform. So of course, no state, no status quo can last forever, and all things are contingent, and there are some factors beyond our control. One day, things in North Korea will change. We can't know when or how or why. The South Korean government, of course, has some contingency plans in place to try to deal with that when it happens. Nevertheless, there will be a certain degree of messiness, and South Korea's peace and stability and safety are sure to be affected by those changes one way or another. But it's not something we can really predict or plan for in a perfect way. South Korea cannot cause change in North Korea, nor will it be able to stop, slow, or prevent changes when they do eventually occur. In some ways, South Korea is a bit like a place where we know a natural disaster will occur at some unknown point in the middle distant future. Because one day something big will happen that will change people's lives dramatically, but we don't know when, and we don't know what shape that will take. So, on this day, when we commemorate the armistice that put the Korean War on pause in 1953, it's time to reflect that one half of Korea has been a success until now. It has made amazing strides. It's free, it's democratic, there's entrepreneurship, there's dynamism, there's K-pop, there's Olympic stars. There's even a minority political party in South Korea that now displays a banner of Karl Marx outside its headquarters, right below a Ford Motors logo. That's an amazing historical irony. Meanwhile, in North Korea, where they used to hang a portrait of Karl Marx at Kim Il-sung Square, he's been removed. So the only Korea with a visible portrait of Karl Marx is now South Korea. South Korea's story is a wonderful story. North Korea has, unfortunately, a much sadder story to tell. And also, unfortunately, it looks like it will keep telling that story for a while until things are ready to change. And I'm going to show a few slides here of interesting information that I picked up while preparing that short speech there. Let's go to share screen. Okay. And
You'll have to go to the display settings, right? On the
okay.
top.
Swap. Have I got it right?
Perfect.
Great. Okay, so a peaceful Korea, it's already here. Well, half of it at least. Have a look at this 2021 Global Peace Index that I found online. It's very interesting. You'll see, if I zoom in, that South Korea is colored green for highly peaceful. Admittedly, North Korea is red. Mike already dealt with this before, so I'll go with it. Go through it quite quickly. Do South Koreans want the two Koreas to unite? Well, here's a recent poll. Every year, the Korean Institute for National Unification does a poll of about 1,000 people to check their attitudes about unification. And this year, we found that 58.7% of the South Korean population believe that unification is necessary. Now that's interesting, that's almost 60%, but it's up from 52.7% last year. So last year, the percentage of South Koreans who believed that unification was necessary was almost down to half. And in the next paragraph, we see that was down from a historic high of 70.7% just after the Singapore summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. So we see that South Korean attitudes towards the necessity of unification does seem to change and fluctuate up and down depending on how dialogue is going. Looking at the youth, the Unification and Education Ministries together did a research project on 68,750 students in elementary, middle, and high schools all across South Korea in November last year. And at that time, 62.4% said that the two Koreas need to reunify, which it's a lot, but it also tells you that more than a third of those same students felt that they weren't sure about the necessity of Korean unification. Right? And in fact, we see that in the bottom paragraph here. The rate of those who saw unification as unnecessary rose to 24.2%. And then if you add those who are not sure either way or who are confused about the matter, that brings us up to over a third. Should unification happen tomorrow or in a far distant future? And this is interesting. We don't really see this discussed in South Korea. When they do those annual surveys at the Ministry of Unification, they don't really ask, do you want unification tomorrow, or the next day? It's always unification at some unspecified point in time. And I think the consensus is here in South Korea that it would be best to have that 20, 30, 50, sometime in the future. The Carnegie Endowment for Peace had its own statistics on the desirability of various unification scenarios. The most popular one on the far left is still peaceful unification through dialogue and negotiation. So in other words, a slow and staggered process, such as President Moon Jae-in of South Korea is trying to lead us through at the moment with very limited success. The second most popular unification scenario is that of peaceful coexistence. And that's interesting. We've got a 33.9% feeling of positivity towards this scenario of a peaceful coexistence of the two Koreas. And then the unification through absorption, that is the German way of a North Korean collapse into South Korea, is really quite low at only 11.3%. Next, you see the age groups, preferred unification scenarios. And what's interesting here, the top dark blue bar is peaceful coexistence. And at the bottom, the light blue, the pale blue, is not in favor of unification at all. And if you add peaceful coexistence and not in favor of unification together, you end up with about 50% for the 19 to 29 age group cohort and the 30 to 39 age group cohort as well. So that's quite surprising, perhaps, to a lot of people, that about half of South Koreans under the age of 40 are comfortable with the idea of peaceful coexistence or no unification at all. But even for the 60-plus age bracket, it's not very different. The perceived likelihood of various unification scenarios, again, a poll there, 40.5% found that peaceful coexistence is the most likely, followed by peaceful unification, way behind at 31.6%. So the question comes, who's really enthusiastic about a peace process with North Korea right now? This idea of a gradualist, peaceful approach to unification through dialogue. And the answer was presented on the cover of Time magazine just a couple of weeks ago. South Korea presented for what was for him the final offer, that because in less than a year, there'll be a presidential election in South Korea and there'll be a new president chosen. So for Moon, it's his last chance. For President Moon, it's his last chance to push that dialogue forward together with North Korea. He's very enthusiastic about it, more so sometimes it seems than the rest of South Korea. Now, how are those peace efforts going? Well, have a look at this. Last year, on June 16th, North Korea demolished, in spectacular form, you'll find the video on YouTube, demolished the inter-Korean liaison office at Kaesong, literally blew it up. It was I'm afraid I don't have a photograph of it, but this is a story from NK News, the website for which I make the podcast. And then yesterday, quite unexpectedly, I mean, the situation can change even as we were speaking. Yesterday at 11 a.m., Seoul announced the hotline communications breakthrough with Pyongyang. And that means that somebody in Pyongyang told somebody in Panmunjom that it was once more okay to answer phone calls from the counterparts in South Korea again. Now, from June the 9th until yesterday, which is, well over a year, there were no inter-Korean hotlines that we know of between North and South Korea. There was, we believe, some unknown communications through back channels between Seoul and Pyongyang, and that's precisely why it was announced yesterday that the hotline would be available once again. But as you can see, there for 13 months, no dialogue at all between North and South Korea. And does the fact that there's now a hotline working again mean that there will be dialogue? Maybe, not necessarily. Anyway, for now, the reality is South Korea is peaceful. Will it last forever? Well, as I said before, all states are temporary, whether good or bad. When will the Korean Peninsula change? We can't say. Let's look at another example that may be somehow analogous. Here's from the National Geographic magazine, information that shows us that by 2050, up to 13.3 million people in Bangladesh could be forced to migrate to other parts of the country or other parts of the world because of the impacts of climate change. That's a startling figure. 13.3 million people could be on the move by 2050. I show that as an example of something that will happen at some point in the future, but we don't yet know exactly when and exactly how large that will be. Other examples, of course, you've got the big one, the earthquake that will one day strike Southern California, or the possible eruption of Baekdusan or Changbaishan, that's the volcano on the border between China and North Korea, the world running out of oil, or any one country running out of potable water. These are things that'll happen that'll affect the peace, but it's hard to plan for them. Here's a map that shows the world at war in 2020. Now, ask yourself, which areas would have been marked red 100 years ago or 200 years ago? It's not going to be the same. You know, it's Europe 100 years ago was very much at war, or well, this was the interwar period 100 years ago. But my point is still the same, that the areas of the world that are unstable, that are not at peace, does tend to change. Quick example here: the Vision of Humanity has a global peace initiative index score. South Korea, you'll see there on the right, came in 57th in its most recent 2021 Global Peace Index. 57th most peaceful country, that is. Number one being Iceland, number two being New Zealand. South Korea did pretty well at 57. You've got some metrics there, only some metrics that South Korea did ranked as unpeaceful in, and they are the high numbers of armed services personnel, the existence of heavy weapons, weapons exports, and militarization. But on other metrics, it did very well. Low numbers of displaced people, low numbers of deaths from conflict, etc. Here, just as an interesting sort of visual example, here's that banner of the South Korean Labour Party, which I mentioned, that has a photograph of Karl Marx right below a logo of Ford Motors. That's photographed just earlier this week, but that banner has been up there for at least a year in South Korea, with nobody trying to burn it down or to blow up the building. Now let's compare. So South Korea, as I said, it ranked 57 in the World Global Peace Index. The United States, not so well, way down at 121, only just a little bit ahead of North Korea at 151. So it's interesting to see how different countries rank on these peace indexes, but at the moment, yes, South Korea doing very well. Almost at the end here, last week in the Dongailbo, one of the major daily newspapers here, very interesting to see that the 9th round of land sales, land parcels located within the demilitarized zone or the civilian control area, was being advertised last week. This is an advertisement, not an article from a newspaper, an advertisement for people, investors who want to invest in land in the demilitarized zone, which suggests that, well, people must be confident that there's not going to be a war, because otherwise, why would you invest in land on the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas? So there's a high degree of confidence that the peaceful state in South Korea is here to stay, at least for the short to midterm future. So conclusions, tentative conclusions. What have I learned from living in Korea for 20 of the last 25 years? South Korea is generally a peaceful and a safe place to live. It's great. It's one of the things that attract people to it. South Koreans do not worry each day about an attack by North Korea. South Koreans are not very interested in unification today or tomorrow, at some point in the unspecified future. So unification is at a distant ideal, which is easy to assent to because it doesn't affect people's lives today. That brings me to the end. I'll stop sharing at this point and give control of the floor back to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jocko. I really, really appreciate your presentation, and all of our presenters did such an excellent job. We're going to take a few questions from our chat and from our YouTube participants. At this time, I would like to ask Jocko, what do you think that Germany and German reunification provides for this discussion on the reunification? What do you think that the prevailing thinking on Germany's reunification affects South Koreans?
Thank you. That's a great question, Dr. Jenkins. When unification happened in Germany, South Korea really sat up and paid attention. It sent a lot of scholars to Germany to study German unification and bring back the learnings, if you will, to use the modern parlance, to Korea. And I think that South Korea was quite afraid, was put off, was discouraged from the idea of a unification by absorption because of the transfer costs, the money that was moved from West Germany to East Germany. I had a very interesting discussion about that exact topic with Dr. Rüdiger Frank from the University of Vienna. He himself is a former East German, wonderful academic. That podcast is available as part of the NK News podcast series. He really highlighted for me the interesting argument that, or he made the argument that South Korea shouldn't be afraid of transfer payments because all that money eventually it circulates within a unified Korea and will benefit South Koreans also. So the money that will be used to create and modernize the North Korean economy will also help people in South Korea, because a lot of people in South Korea will be involved in that project. So it's something that South Koreans shouldn't be afraid of unification simply because of the German experience. That's I think the major lesson that I take from that.
Thank you, Jocko. Dr. Chung, we're very honored to have you. You're a renowned expert on Korea and also on China. And I first want to mention that your daughter, Natalie Chung, is here. Thank you, Natalie, for being with us. She is a very well-known and respected news anchor and journalist for RDI, which is Radio Canada International, both television and radio. Natalie, welcome to you. It's an honor to have you with us, with your father, Dr. Joseph Chung. So, Dr. Chung, what do you recommend America do to help China cooperate to bring about North and South Korea reunification? What can America do to cooperate together with China? Are there areas of cooperation that are possible? And also in that is also, do you believe that China wants North Korea to have nuclear weapons and become a nuclear power? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, listening to speakers, I was wondering to what extent South Korea or North Korea, for that matter, has autonomy in decide in the future. We had tried the Sunshine policy. Moon Jae-in has been trying very hard. It's gone nowhere. Therefore, Korean problems of unification is a matter of international problem. We should see that in the dynamics international power game. Having said that, I know China. China is not a very strong country. That's very poor. Per capita GNP only $10,000. It's compared to $63,000 in the US. Militarily, well, what's called the A2 AED is only defensive posture. So I think what China is very afraid of America. I know that. They're very scared because they can't really fight within the state. They want the peace. So the Chinese values cannot go beyond China. It's too local. It's a result of a long story of religion, Taoism, Confucianism, so on. It can't go anywhere. So I'm asking you to accept China as it is. We can't have democracy everywhere. For that matter, democracy has been declining for the last 20 years. There's a major poll made by reported by the Guardian. They had a poll with 50,000 people in 53 countries. The result is the danger to democracy in the United States and the major company and inequality of income. So in order that democracy flourishes, I love democracy. It is the best invention ever had by human being. But sustain that, we should do something to correct that. those who are against democracy is the Europeans, not the Asians. So there are so many things we can do. For instance, well, China should stop sort of affirmative, the militarization of the South Sea, for instance. There are many things the Chinese can do, and many things the US can do to understand each other. Nobody's perfect. China has its problem. US is not perfect. So they accept what they are. Then we have a global enemy, a virus, climate change. And we don't know how long this virus will continue. We have new problems. So I say, how about live together? We cannot unify the world under democracy or Chinese socialism. You can do that. So my sincere wish, I'm a Christian, and I like to see a world in which the civilization coexist, in which people love each other. That's my wish, and it's possible. China's threat should not exaggerate. The final word, Korean destiny does not depend on Koreans. It depends on the internal dynamics. In other words, Koreans used to be shrimp, now dolphin, but still dolphin, you see, surrounded by big whales. So that's my the reflection on this problem. Thank you.
Very good, Dr. Chung. Michael, we have, as a guest on this program and the host of the Washington Brief, sponsored by the Washington Times Foundation, Ambassador Christopher Hill. He would agree with one aspect of your statement, and that is that unless we have a vision that helps China see a reunified Korea that is not a military enemy or threat, in which the United States simply has tremendous control and influence, unless we paint a vision and show how China will see a friendly, reunified Korea, there will be no support from China. What are your thoughts on that? What are the possibilities of creating a vision that China would feel comfortable with?
I think that's a problem or a difficulty, because I think the vision that needs to be created is one of a democratic, free market Northeast Asia. I disagree with Professor Chung on this. I don't think you can turn to peoples of some countries and say, no, dictatorship is okay for you people. Not for us, but it's okay for you. I think, to quote Kim Dae-jung, culture is not destiny. Democracy is a destiny. And now democracy is in the world very visibly. It is wanted by all, because everybody wants to live in a system that is fair as possible, where they're as free as possible. You know, of course, we have restraints on us through law and cultural expectation, but we want to be able to live in free and fair societies where we have the ability periodically to choose our leaders. And I think the primary vision is for a democratic Northeast Asia. I don't mean a kind of regime change mentality. I just mean that that's what the US and its allies should see. And I think it's going to happen anyway. I mean, I think China's going to have its democracy moment. It had one at Tiananmen Square, it didn't work. It's going to happen again, because 1.3 billion people who have the money and the desire and the information to want to say, you know, go on vacation anywhere in the world and make free choices, are going to want to be able to choose who their leaders are. So this illiberal China under Xi Jinping, I think, is temporary. I think, but you raised a very interesting question that I actually also disagree, Professor Chung, by the way, is I think the real reason the Koreans haven't unified is because of the Koreans, not because of the foreigners. They don't want to. They can't. You can't have two systems with such different values unifying, just not going to work. And so something's got to give. And I think we all know what it is. It's going to be the end of that regime in North Korea. But the dangerous moment will come is if China is then afraid and feels the need to move in and take control, or might be invited in by an unsteady post-Kim government in North Korea, might invite the Chinese to come in. That's what we want to avoid. So I don't think it's a question.
Thank you, Michael. That's good.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Jocko, is it possible to have reunification without the total collapse of the North Korean regime?
I mean, it's not impossible. We just need to define, in that case, what unification means. It's a bit like what Michael Breen discussed earlier, that there may be a third way, but it's hard to talk about the prospects of how possible it is without knowing exactly what that would look like. And if we're talking about some kind of a federal system, of course, that's something that I think both the president of North, both Kim Il-sung when he was alive, and I think it was perhaps No Tae-woo of South Korea when he was president, they both talked about a sort of a confederal system where both North and South Korea would keep their systems, but they would have perhaps a shared, I don't know, a foreign ministry at the top and a titular figurehead president at the top. It does seem like that would be a very difficult system to make work, to make practical, because the existence of a South Korea which is free and dynamic, and where there's an entrepreneurship and where people can, on the one hand, you've got writers who are out there in front of the Kongbuk Palace each week demonstrating for the imprisoned President Park Geun-hye. On the other hand, you've got the Labour Party with its banner of Karl Marx that I showed earlier. You've got this wonderfully chaotic, argumentative society on the one hand, and North Korea where everybody is forced to conform. And so the existence of a South Korea as it is always a challenge, an existential challenge or threat to the North Korean system. And so if the two of them were to somehow work, live together under the same confederal system, I think that would pose great threats of instability to the ongoing existence of the North Korean system. So I think that the North Korean leaders would be very reluctant to go in for that.
Very good. Any other comments on that? It's the collapse of the North Korean regime, Dr. Chung, necessary for reunification.
Well, there are two Koreas really, conservative and the liberal. And the liberal, about 70% behind the liberal government. The conservatives regard the North Korea's enemy from the beginning. Therefore, the perception of North Korea among the conservatives are different from the liberal Koreans. Therefore, we have to be very careful here. Dr. Green talked about the shared values. Shared values of blood. Koreans, they believe they are same race, same blood. That's the beginning. Now the Judaism is only a pragmatic regime. It's not an ideological regime. It's just to survive. Therefore, I know I met many North Koreans. They're like me, like you. They love freedom. They will have to go to theater. They have to go to park. So the regime in North Korea is just to survive. That's all. Now, once some communication between all North and South, I think there will be a greater change in values in North Korea. I agree with Dr. Green. They will be more democratic. I'm sure that the North Koreans love Americans. I know that. If
Same.
inside,
Thank you,
so
Dr.
what I'm saying that it's possible North Korea, South Korea are not enemies. They are same race. It takes time. The values will be converged. Someday we have a shared value, then unification and a democracy, I hope.
The theme of universal values that Mr. Breen brought up is very, very important. One aspect of universal value in the South would be respect for faith, traditions, and indigenous faith, religious freedom. And there is no place for that in the North as well as in China. There's no plurality of or interfaith or religious freedom promoted or even accepted. That would be one universal value that's actually quite challenging, but it's so necessary. Any hope for any hope, Michael, for religious freedom? I know that China has been somewhat dealing with the whole problem of religion in its country. There still is some religion, and the Roman Catholics and others have tried to negotiate some kind of a position there. What's your thoughts on religious freedom in China, and what's the possibility for North Korea?
Yeah, I think religious freedom is very, very important. The Chinese are going in the opposite direction right now. Anything that they're particularly going for small religious groups, and obviously very famously for the Uyghurs, which you know, again, I see hope. I see sort of I'm optimistic in the long term for China, because I don't see how a country becoming middle class can put up with this type of illiberal approach for much longer. The North Koreans, you know, frankly, South Korea in many ways has a higher level of, there must be sort of studies on this, but I haven't seen one, but my personal view is South Korea has a higher level of religious freedom than even the United States does, because the US is implicitly Protestant, whereas the Koreans are not implicitly anything. They have true religious freedom, and I think that we'll see that in North Korea in due course.
Thank you very much. This has been a wonderful session. There's many more questions that are coming. We have gone a little bit over our time, but it's worth it because of this great panel. I want to thank you all. I do want to make one final point, and then let each of you have a final comment. James Rogers, the investor who's well known throughout the United States and Asia, is an American, but he also has residence in Singapore. When he learned of the possibility of the Japan-Korea tunnel and the possibility of a peaceful North and South Korea cooperating together, even unifying, his comment was that if you could have Japan, Korea, and China linked together, and even linked to the rest of the markets of the world, and even go on with that kind of highway, that there would be an economic revolution that would be profound. Korea is the 10th, ROK is the 10th largest economy in the world with no roads to deliver to any market. It's a phenomenal, a miracle. If those roads were to open up, if there's cooperation, China, Korea, and then on to Russia and even Europe, and then even if we could cross the Bering Strait, which is also proposed, tremendous economic revolution would occur. That's what he stated, and that kind of got him interested in working with UPF. Any final comments on that economic revolution, the hope of the future, if we come together? Jocko, and then Dr. Chung, and then Michael, Mr. Michael Breen. Go ahead, Jocko.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've long found the idea of undersea tunnels to be a fascinating and attractive one, quite frankly. But yeah, I don't know about. Well, Well, I mean, obviously there are technically feasibility questions there, so I'd need to talk to some engineers. But if it were feasible, if it were possible to do it physically, yeah, it would be an absolute a game changer. I mean, you could drive a car, you could have a train from Tokyo all the way to London, you know, or even to Washington, as you say, across the Bering Strait. That would be remarkable to have that. It would certainly require a degree of trust and cooperation between countries that we don't yet have. I mean, you know, when you have, when your country and your neighboring country are connected by railways, that's great when you're friends, but that's terrible when you're at war with each other. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Jocko, thank you for your participation today and your brilliant remarks. And we'll be following you on that podcast. Thank you very much. Dr. Chung.
For the tunnel, can I say one more?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. That started when the General Park Chung-hee was in power. That's the 60s. They've been studying many times. The conclusion was too expensive in terms of the productivity of the tunnel. However, it's important Japanese economy be integrated into continental economy. That's for sure. And once we have a peace on the Korean Peninsula, Russia will come with gas pipes, connect with Japan somehow. So I'm very optimistic in the future, provided there will be peace in that area. There will be a huge block, economic block. It will be beneficial to everybody, Europe and North America. So let's hope for that. Not the tunnel. I don't think it will happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Breen.
Yeah, I'm an incorrigible optimist. I think this tunnel is a terrific idea, and I think we're talking. Jacko and I here. Well, actually, Dr. Chung is from this part of the world, and Jacko and I are talking from this part of the world today. By the way, it's 4 o'clock in the morning here. This part of the world is already a powerhouse, and it can only get better. Dr. Chung just mentioned there's this idea of the Russians bringing Sakhalin gas through North Korea by pipeline to South Korea. You know, we're all going to get connected, and you don't have to have total unification for that to work. You just need a measure of trust. And so something I didn't say in my talk, but my imperative for North Korea is not unification, but reconciliation, to get to the point where, you know, Jacko and I could say, hey, Jacko, let's have dinner in Pyongyang tonight. And we just drive up across the border and off we go. So you can have countries that have their differences, but the economics can drive things forward. And I think that's what we've got to look for. I think that's going to be our next step.
Well, thank you to all of you. And a special thanks to UPF of Canada, Duffy, Dr. Frank Familaro for your support that we could have a guest such as Dr. Chung. And thanks to Hans Moyer for helping us with Mr. Breen and Jocko. It's an honor to meet you all. And again, Natalie, thank you. I know you're so busy and we're honored to see you supporting this today. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Hans, you have final words for the next International Media Association for Peace.
Well, I need everybody to be on the team because we're looking for more presenters every month, the last Tuesday of every month. And I think from all of our participants, I think you all qualify to come in and share your insights and understandings about how to bring about peaceful unification of the Korean Peninsula. And I see that as the key to peace in Northeast Asia and the community of nations that make up our world today. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a wonderful week. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.